Rain World is such an alluring game for a lot of reasons, but perhaps most prominently because of its fascinating world and story. Rather than explicit spoken dialogue or character conflicts, Rain World relies on subtlety, secrets, and visual elements as proponents of its storytelling. This is great because it lends the plot this unearthly, mysterious, and almost philosophical tone that simply would not be there if it took a more traditional approach to storytelling. Now, there are plenty of videos out there that discuss and dissect the lore of Rain World in detail. After all, the game's been out for over 3 years already, and in all that time though, I haven't really come across a video that does a thorough analysis of the story itself. That is the journey of our main character, the slug cat known as the Survivor. And that irks me because there is a lot of minute detail and narrative work here that is on such a good level of minimalistic writing and storytelling. This game is like a narrative haiku, able to sum up some really deep concepts and themes with not much in its toolbox. I know this is a weird analogy, but think of something like what C.S. Lewis did with writing. You know, Chronicles of Narnia, those loose religious allegories and moral themes that kind of tied everything together, outlining and motivating the plot of the books. There's something similar going on here. Anyway, in this video, I want to elaborate on the story of the Survivor slug cat, detailing briefly its chronology and focusing deeply on how it ties into broader themes presented in the game. First of all, this opening cutscene deserves an Oscar or something, because it packs so much emotion and conflict into a set of static images lasting less than 2 minutes total. We get a small snapshot of this world and its harsh ecosystem of rainfall. We fall in love with the slug cats and their families, and get a powerful motivation to begin playing the game and reuniting with our family.
I'm emotionally compromised already.
And with that, we start the game. Straight to the point. Boom. On track for good writing already. But here's our first problem. Before we do anything, we need to ensure we survive. Find food, take shelter from the rain, escape predators. We soon find it's hard searching for a lost family in a world as merciless as this one. Now, when we survive one cycle, we accumulate some score, if you can call it, on this esoteric scale. And soon after, when we are eaten, killed, or starved, we see the score decrement instead. And so it's established that there is meaning behind continued survival and a consequence to death. Moreover, by moving up on this scale, we can access new areas, witness certain strange events, and even gain temporary passage throughout the world. Benefits that are lost when our streak of survival is threatened. But we soon find that this cycle has a limit, that at a certain point, continued survival and death are indeed meaningless. It's almost as if survival is a short-term goal, the consequences of seeking something important. The search for our family. How did we forget? And so, led by this helpful if not terribly inconsistent being, we continue our search across vast distances over the course of many cycles. But we find no sight of our original family, nor any other slug cats for that matter, except for in our dreams. But then there comes a time when we come to terms with the fact that maybe we really are alone now, that our family isn't around, that they've passed on, or that we won't ever be able to see them again. But for now, we follow our guide without much else to do anyway, perhaps in some vague hope that it can still lead us to our family, and we soon come across Looks to the Moon, a somewhat prophetic being that unfortunately cannot communicate with us. If we decide to eat one of the little things that float around her, though why would you do that, you cruel monster, we begin to see things that seem like spirits and can even interact with them slightly. We dream of things like these spirits, though in resemblance to us, perhaps even our family? Again, we are led throughout the world, either by the vague movements of these spirits or Looks to the Moon still guiding us, and we venture deep inside something known as 5 Pebbles, and it's here where the story takes a crucial turn. Now, this guy is incredibly powerful. He's able to grant us the ability to understand speech, he gives us extended karmic reach, and can even forcefully move or kill us telekinetically. He compares himself even to a god, rightfully so, and yet he speaks of failure and frustrated attempts at something that must be achieved. There is this allusion to cycles again, and worldly limits, of repeated attempts and fruitless struggles, not unlike the problems haunting us. By reading more into the lore of the game, we find that these beings are called iterators, which ties even closer to this theme of repetition and inescapable cycles. Five Pebbles does offer us a vague solution to this problem, a way to escape this intangible struggle, by giving us our next set of directions. Interestingly, he claims it is something that will work for us, but not necessarily for him or all others. Now I want to pause and comment on how spectacular this mid-game conflict is established. The developers know that this is a video game, and that death, survival, and revival are simply necessary, almost accidental mechanics of games from the days of penny arcades. Yet they call this idea into question, turning it into a keystone in the story, that death, survival, and revival are inherently the struggle, in a way that almost makes the game seem ever so slightly self-aware. I'll get to more of that later. For now, let's jump toward the ending of the game. So the ending of Rain World comes once we follow Five Pebbles' directions to the deepest part of the earth. Here we find the almost mystical remains of an old civilization and immerse ourselves in the ridiculous particle effect nightmare called the Void Sea. In diving down, we're taken by this bizarre alien creature far, far away from the world, as if we're physically distancing ourselves from reality. Swimming for some time, we encounter what seems like mirror images of ourselves, which seems to call into mind again this repetition, iteration, though now we're moving towards something more unified, meaning, or a state of being, perhaps? The fertilization imagery here is hard to ignore, though it makes for a great analogy if you think about it. The death of an old way of life and rebirth into something new, final, and true. This last cutscene shows us that we've taken the form of something very similar to the spirits we've encountered before, but it's no longer just our old family we see, but a multitude of slowcats, a new, boundless family. Wow, definitely a doozy of an ending, but all the connections are there if you look for them. When we gave up the search for our family and instead focus on our own ascension, we find a family beyond our dreams. When we acknowledge the limits of our abilities to survive and accumulate karma, we soar past them. And there's so much clever writing here too, how the mysterious ancient peoples ironically distance themselves as far as possible from the thing they sought below, or how the very nature of ascension is paradoxically achieved by a deep descent into the earth, or how to achieve this ascension you must reach maximum karma, refuting the idea that life on the surface is meaningless. Only those who've explored, learned, and suffered through these cycles truly deserve the fate of ascending. So many video games use detailed description and character dialogue or exposition to establish the plot, and what ends up happening is that the gameplay becomes an incidental or separate mechanism for merely exploring it. You know, this goal Y awaits you at the end, so you do X to get there and achieve it. Whether it be hunting down monsters for the sake of research, fighting to protect the one you love, or even simply trying to get back home. But in Rain World, X and Y are so tightly coupled. In fact, they're opposites, really. Beating the game is simply the absolute and final end of your struggle, and I find this just fascinating. It's a strangely selfish and personal, though deeply satisfying ending. No other traditional adventure game really embodies this sort of storytelling or conflict. Though games I think that come close include Celeste, whose mountainous climb alludes to deeper conflicts of self-anxiety and depression, or Link's Awakening, where beating the game is closely tied with Link's own, awakening. Well, I hope I gave some insight into the story of Rain World. It's a brutal game, pretty long too, and it's kind of a shame how inaccessible it is because of that. But again, that's what makes it so profound too, in its setting, storytelling, and conflict. If the game were simpler, more fair, or easier, we would lose so much of that central theme, that though life and death are but cruel cycles, there is hope in letting go and in making the long journey to ascend.